Hey everyone, welcome to another session of Conversations with Courageous Cancer Warriors. And I have to tell you, I'm kind of geeking out about our guests. So we have Victor Briere, who is a Ayurvedic doctor. And I am so excited because, as you know, my stand on conventional medicine is that there's always a different way in how we could do things, especially as cancer patients, as caregivers, and as practitioners. So I would love for him to tell us a little bit about how he got here and all the goodness that he embodies with his work. So Victor, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Lori, for having me on the show.
I am so excited for this conversation to the point that I completely just ignored your bio and anything that's in it. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure. So I'm an Ayurvedic doctor in Northern California. I have a clinic up here, and Ayurveda is a very old form of medicine that comes from what is now India. And it is holistic in nature, which means that you don't take one part of the body and isolate it and just deal with that part of the body. It's an acknowledgement that the whole body is working in tandem constantly from the moment you're born to the moment you die. And we have to address that being to keep the entirety of its balance intact.
Yeah, I love that. Now, how did you get started?
I got started actually. I'll give the short version of the story. I had a relatively minor health problem of my own, but it was not so minor that I could just ignore it and keep going. So I was a younger guy. I was 18 years old, and I went to a bunch of doctors, neurologists at UCLA Hospital in Los Angeles, and got the whole workups and all that stuff. And at the end of the road, it was, oh, we don't really know what this is. So you could either do surgery or take painkillers. And at at that time, 19 years old, I wasn't going to do that. So I rolled the dice and went to a yoga class. I'd never been to one before. Turned out that the teacher was really wonderful, scheduled a private session with her. And she looked me up and down, said, all right, try these things. And within a few weeks, my pain was gone, that I'd had for many years. So I was like, whoa, there is a whole world here of healing that I was unaware of. And went down the road, traveled a lot, looked into more yoga, and eventually through my practice of yoga found Ayurveda.
I
um,
absolutely love that.
yeah, committed to it fully from day one and never looked back.
So explain to us what you like when a client comes and sees you, like what does that look like?
Typically, they'll start with just a consultation. So these days we'll get on Zoom. And pre-COVID times, we would sit down in person in my office or get on Zoom and go through an Ayurvedic assessment. And that entails a full health history assessment. And I'll read your pulses Ayurvedically, which is very different from just counting heart rate and things like that. That's a whole topic in and of itself. And look at your tongue, look at your eyes, palpate your abdomen, the whole 9 yards, and then ask a lot of questions, 1,000 questions about that may seem completely irrelevant to what's going on, but are very relevant to your health profile to an Ayurvedic professional. So what do you eat? What time do you eat? How often do you eat at that time? What foods do you eat and how erratic is it or how stable is it? What time do you go to sleep? What time do you wake up? What time do you have a bowel movement? To the point, exhaustive. Mm-hmm. And that gives me a fairly clear picture of what the causative factors are in creating the ailment that you're now experiencing. So of course, today we're talking about cancer. So it's very rare that cancer just pops up out of the blue. Even when there's a genetic predisposition, I feel that's a cultural myth that we have grown up around, that, oh, genes create cancer. Of course, there's some truth to that, but it's by far not the whole story.
Agreed.
We have a lot of influence on our health profile as we live our lives. And our habits from many years ago play out in our bodies many years later. And a lot of times those causative factors are buried in our lifestyle and we just don't even know, but they result in a disease like cancer.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that the fact that I always go back to is that they say that from the time you're diagnosed, if you look back 7 to 10 years, there's always a stressful incident in your life that has occurred that it ultimately had your cells turn over, right? So it's exactly what you're saying, that you may have cancer today, but it's really something that you've done years ago. So whether it was a lifestyle choice or an incident that happened to you that puts you under a lot of stress, that will eventually have some people turn over into having cancerous cells. So I find that really fascinating. Mr. Johnny Nash is here with us, folks, today. He's joining the conversation. So I would love to get your expertise on this whole thought process. You know, we believe that keeping a positive mindset is so important, especially as a preventative measure. But then once you get diagnosed with something, you definitely need to maintain that. So is that something that you work on with your clients as well, outside of, you know, their physical ailments? Do you work on their mindset and that kind of stuff too?
Yeah, and I think that's key, is that we live in a culture where there's the mind and there's the body.
Mhm.
That's not the truth. Ayurveda is very mind body, or body mind. They're an integrated whole.
Love that.
Um, there there is no such thing as a mind that has no effect on the body, and vice versa. And the vagus nerve, or the autonomic nervous system, which I'm sure some of the listeners have heard of at least, is basically the mind body connection. We have this gigantic nerve that runs through our body that connects to all our vital organs: heart, spleen, liver, lungs, everything, and connects to the brain and filters all our sense perceptions, not thought, sight, sound, smell, touch, all those things. And then we interpret those as either threatening or safe.
Mhm.
And then that changes our whole physiological profile within a second. So when we go back to what you were saying about stress, like if you trace back 7 to 10 years, you'll pretty much find in anyone suffering from cancer an extremely stressful event, aka an extremely threatening event. So what happens there is that our body is built to handle a certain amount of stress, but it can't get overloaded. So if we enter into a situation where we're perpetually exposed to what's perceived as a threatening situation, that gets translated through our nervous system into our vital organs and completely changes how we act. One of those things is our digestive process. And so when we're threatened, our digestion shuts down for the most part. And then we create toxicity in our bloodstream because we don't digest our food properly. That improperly digested food doesn't get broken down, but then it gets absorbed into our bloodstream, and then our body has to filter that. Over time, many years, it can't. And then that is a huge contributing factor of the generation of cancer cells, mutated cells that no longer operate like a healthy cell of its type.
Because you've created a toxic environment based on, you
Fear.
know, your outside
Yeah.
stimulants, right? Wow. Yeah, that's a really excellent way on how to put that. I love that. I love
Yeah,
that.
so Ayurveda is huge with any kind of cancer protocol. Ayurveda is going to be huge on correcting the digestive tract, whether or not it could be stomach cancer. That's kind of like, oh, obviously I need to correct my digestive tract, but that's true for every kind of cancer, including lung cancer, brain cancer, bone cancer, any cancer. That process is so important. And it's one of the reasons that um, people suffering from cancer will almost always also suffer from some kind of digestive imbalance.
Mm.
That, of course, in our modern medicinal system is labeled as a separate disease. So you get a pill for that and a pill for this. But Ayurvedically speaking, it's the same pathology. It's not a different pathology.
And what comes to mind for me right now is, they say once you go plant-based, it really supports your digestive system. It's something that can help you stay cancer-free. But as you say that to me, I'm like, well, it kind of makes sense why a plant-based diet would do that, because of the process of digestion alone. If you have really complex proteins that you're trying to digest, then your body is working harder to do that. So it makes sense. Like you just connected something for me, and I hope it translates to everybody else, but it makes absolute sense now why a plant-based diet would be so beneficial, because it's one less stressor that you have in your body.
Yeah, and Ayurveda will take that 2 steps further. The first step is that don't just eat any plants. There are the right plants based on your personal constitution. So that means you may be better off with cucumbers than tomatoes, whereas someone else might be better off with tomatoes than cucumbers. So Ayurveda gets into that level of detail. And yeah, most of the time, the vast majority of the time, unless you're talking about a severe emaciation case, Ayurveda is going to recommend a plant-based diet for someone trying to heal cancer, um, along with a lot of herbal remedies as well, and specific eating times. That's the other thing. The circadian rhythm, regularity of circadian rhythm, is a huge factor. In the West, we tend to focus on nutrition, 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 what vitamins are in it, what proteins are in it. But that is, again, just one sliver of the whole story. When you eat and in what emotional state you eat in are just as important, if not more important, than the nutrients in the food you're eating.
That's amazing. That's
Yeah,
amazing, because that's not a common conversation, right? Like we don't ever talk about that at all.
hardly ever. It's always, does it have vitamin C? It's like, well, okay, maybe it does or maybe it doesn't, but I could go and have this wonderful meal full of all these wonderful nutrients. And if I'm eating it hurried and stressed out and thinking about, oh my God, I'm going to die, or, someone else is going to die, or I'm going to get fired, or whatever it is, and I'm in my sympathetic nervous system, meaning I've been triggered and I feel threatened, and my digestive capacities are relatively shut down. That's going to have the same effect as eating something undigestible with very low nutrient content. So the food's one half. The food might be my partner, but I'm the other partner, and it always takes two to tango.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God. That is amazing. I thank you for coming on and explaining that, because the way that you've explained it really just makes sense. And it's, we hear so much about you have to eat all the right foods and you have to stay not stressed and you have to make sure you exercise. And like, for me, you just explained all of it very easily and condensedly, and it clicked, right? Like on a different level. So everyone who listens knows my story, right? I got diagnosed on my baseline screening after I had my primary care physician give me a self-exam. I did self-exams all the time. I ate the right thing. I exercised. I have no family history. I'm not a gene carrier. And I was still diagnosed with 4 lesions on my left side on my baseline mammogram. And I joke around about it all the time that I can name each lesion, right? Because it really stands true to, like, my largest lesion was one of my biggest factors, like stress factors, 10 years before my diagnosis. Like I have specific timelines. And so for somebody like me, I found that the entire process of going through the treatment journey was overwhelming, which is what launched me into having this podcast and becoming a coach. And I found it to be very interesting because I had worked in the cancer field, in the hospital field for 20 years. So I was very surprised by being overwhelmed because I knew the environment I was dealing with. And what I think really fostered my overwhelm was that the fact that I felt like I had to become my own advocate, but I was limited in the knowledge that I knew as far as holistic approaches, because all they wanted to do was give me conventional medicine. And like you said, give one pill to fix this symptom and then another pill to fix that symptom. And I literally remember saying to my physician, I don't want the pills you're giving me now, and you want me to take more. Like there has to be another way. And they couldn't speak to that. So I had to start looking outside for some of the ailments that I had. And do you find that that's a common thing that people come to you with, where they're like, I just can't take it anymore. I can't take these drugs anymore. I would love for you to speak to that.
Yeah, there are kind of a few types who come in, or a few, I guess, categories of cancer people who've been diagnosed with cancer who come in. One is the person who has been diagnosed and is doing chemo and radiation or some variety of that, and wants to use Ayurveda as a supportive tool to mitigate the severe symptoms of those drugs, and also see what Ayurveda can do as far as reversing cancer. That's one type of person. Another type of person is they recently got diagnosed and they want to see what holistic measures are available before going to those. And then the third type is, I got a family history, or I'm worried about this or something like that. How do I prevent all this? See all three types, and they're all very different. Actually, the attitudes are all very different. A lot of times what happens is, and this is very important, going back to that whole stress factor, they come in, they're already stressed. By the time they come see me, they're already stressed. And of course, that's perpetuating symptoms. It's aggravating any symptom they already have and perpetuating pathology. And we gotta be real about this. I could sit there and someone could say, I'm stressed. I could say, well, that's not healthy. Stop being stressed. That's ridiculous. You can't give someone that advice. Right? What are the causes of the stress? That's what's important. And then how are we going to create real solutions around those causes? Not, maybe it's a real stress. Maybe it's a genuine situation in their life that is actually not avoidable and is causing large amounts of stress. Then we got to work on resilience. And there are many ways to do that. Maybe it's a perceived stress that doesn't actually have real causes based in reality, but the stress is real. So that's working on, okay, why is reality being perceived as so stressful? And typically it could be past abuse or past trauma or past something. But we got to get real with that. You can't just sit there and tell someone don't get stressed. Life is going to throw stresses at us. That's guaranteed. It's how we then digest those stresses that makes us resilient or susceptible to damage in our body over time. So the digestion process of our experiences is mirrored by the digestive process of our food. And if you're not digesting your experiences well, you're not going to digest your food well, and vice versa, by the way. Because you could eat something disturbing and that'll cause anxiety in the mind. And then that mind will pin it on something that has nothing to do with the source of that anxiety. So, you eat something not good for you, like a donut, and that actually will create a stress response in the body. And then you'll get agitated in your mind and you'll say, oh, it must be my boss's fault. It must be my friend said the wrong thing to me, or it must be my kid's fault who's doing all these things wrong, or whatever it is, right? All that's going on all at once in whatever type of person walks into the clinic. So here's a common story. Someone walks in the clinic, they just got let's say a melanoma diagnosis. And it's like, I know that I don't want to do chemo and radiation, but I don't know much about holistic health or Ayurveda. So what can you do? But I'm really scared. And then what you'll see a lot of times is that people in that position, they'll start, but if they don't see results as fast as they want to see results, they'll default to the chemo and radiation. And that fear is just driving them that direction because it's more known, quote unquote. And so those are major things to work through in determining the course of therapy that one person wants to receive. Or someone getting the chemo radiation is, I'm looking for holistic health because I hear that it could lighten up my diet and make me feel better while I undergo this treatment. But there's so much fear in that conversation. There's so much, I need to control what's going on. I feel out of control. I don't know what to do. And that's very natural. But that needs to be addressed, because as long as that fear is so heavy and so intense, that's going to perpetuate the disease. That's the important part.
I mean, you nailed it, because that's so true. And a lot of people, I like to say that there's two kinds of people where some people, we all like to control things to a certain extent, but some of us are not as forceful about having to control every single minute detail. And, I see it all the time, right? It's something that I work on with my clients too, of like being able to recognize that some things are out of your control, and that having that stress around not being able to control everything is going to do exactly that. Like you're going to, I don't want to say that you're going to manifest more disease, but the more stress that you have, the more rigid you are in your being. I mean, it's kind of the way that goes, right? So I would love to hear then, when you have somebody that comes into your clinic and they are just single focused, really like feeling that they have to control everything, how do you support them in like having them see the value of what you bring, and that it is a long-term thing, right? Because I correlate it with losing weight, right? If somebody doesn't see results within 2 weeks of them going on whatever diet that they're on, they're like, forget it, this doesn't work, I'm out of here, and they go and eat a pizza, right? So I feel that this is a long-term, it's a lifestyle change that you're really implementing for somebody. So how do you keep them on board with you?
I mean, the very short answer is I do not actually try to keep them on board. It's completely their choice.
Mm-hmm.
I understand. I have a lot of understanding of how scary that is. I mean, it's terrifying, right? So, and people are facing their mortality in a lot of ways. And so I don't really think it's healthy to try and convince someone to walk a road that they don't want to walk.
Mm-hmm.
What I would do instead is just start a conversation about the fear and about why the fear is present, because a lot of times the fear is being projected onto cancer, but the same fear has been there for a long time about a lot of things. And so maybe I won't even talk about cancer specifically. I'm going to try with an Ayurvedic professional. You're always going to try and get to the root cause. What's really going on? What's really driving this whole thing? So I could give an example of a case, who's given me permission to talk about the case. So, and obviously I won't use names. Form of blood cancer. And so we start digging into the lifestyle, and he's like, I do not want to get chemo and radiation. I don't want to do it, but I don't know anything about Ayurveda. And so I'm going to try my best to open up and trust. Great. That is great. That takes a lot of courage. Okay. So we start talking and digging into the lifestyle, and he's like, I'm afraid of this. I'm afraid of that. I'm afraid of having relationships. I'm afraid of losing all my money. So much fear. And now I'm afraid of my health. So all of it, right? Every aspect of life, there's fear. It's just covered everything. And fear has spread through the body. And he's holding his body that way. And so to get relief from stress, because those fears were present before, he was a relatively healthy guy, quote unquote, before the diagnosis. So to mitigate his fear, he was engaging in a lot of lifestyle practices that were not healthy. Drinking 6-7 cups of coffee a day, getting really anxious, drinking alcohol at night to calm down, and nothing like so intense that he was exploding his whole life. So, unless someone was really looking, he was within social norms. Mm-hmm. And then there was another habit he was doing, which is he was excessively masturbating to relieve himself from stress. And I know that's a taboo subject, but I'm talking about it for a reason, right?
Good. Yeah,
because
we're good.
These are the lifestyle components that people don't like to talk about because they are taboo, but they have a massive impact on our health profile.
They do.
So he was ejaculating maybe 30 to 40 times a month, which is a lot. Right? And no Western doctor is really probably going to ever talk to him about that. And he probably wouldn't even reveal that. Right? But in the exploration of his lifestyle, it comes out that he's got these habits that are fairly extreme. And so I just told him honestly, I was like, those are definitely contributing to your pathology, guaranteed. So let's clean that up. Let's clean that up and see what happens. He's like, yeah, because, my doctors are pushing me to get chemo, da, 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 on and on. It's like, okay, let's start. I'm not going to tell you to do chemo or not do chemo or radiation or whatever it is. That is completely your choice, and you got to decide that for yourself. But let's just start with this other stuff, see what happens. So he starts changing his diet, starts changing his lifestyle. He stops drinking coffee, which means he doesn't need to drink the alcohol because he doesn't go up and then need to come down. His sleep improves immediately, his digestion improves, and he stops ejaculating completely. Celibacy was actually part of the prescription for him for a period of time, not forever. Within 8 months, his cancer was gone.
Wow.
Completely.
Wow.
And of course he took an herbal protocol, but it's just one story that shows the force of these lifestyle practices. And there are so many, he didn't realize that his lifestyle was causing cancer. He thought maybe it was genetic, his grandpa had cancer, things like that. But his genetics anyone's genetics can get triggered by our habits. And our habits are often, adopted by our family structures.
Yeah.
And so if mom or dad has cancer, it's such an easy thing to say, oh, it's genetically driven, but it may not be. It may be habit driven, and you picked up the habits, even the emotional ones, the way we deal with situations from our family members.
Absolutely. And I think that's an excellent point, because a lot of times we don't recognize. So I'll share a personal story, and mom and dad, I'm sorry, but I recently, within the last 2 years or so, we picked up my parents and we went on a family road trip to go see other family. And it wasn't until there was 4 of us in the car, right? It was my 2 parents, my boyfriend, and myself, that I recognized the amount of anxiety my parents have when they are outside of their comfort zone. So usually when we saw my parents, it was more confined to their home, to their environment. It was like comfortable for them. If we were going somewhere, they were familiar. And then we're on this road trip and we were kind of at the helm, right? It was now like a loss of control. My parents weren't the ones calling the shots. Like, we were driving the car, we were doing all of it. And it wasn't until this experience that I recognized the amount of anxiety that my parents had around being outside of their comfort zone. And it wasn't until that moment that it made me recognize in myself where my anxiety came from, right? So I love the fact that you brought that up, because it is something that is learned behavior for a lot of people. So some of it is something that not all of it, but most of it is learned behavior. And I love the fact that you bring this up. And I also love the fact that you talk about herbal solutions. So somebody like me, I am on tamoxifen because my cancer is ER positive. So they're shutting down my ovaries. So I have 2 options. I either stay on tamoxifen until I'm menopausal, or I go and I get my ovaries taken out and then I'm automatically menopausal. So that is not really an option that I want to go through right now. So I've gone down the road of tamoxifen. And it was one of those things that part of what happens, and I know a lot of people can relate, is that you're going through this experience. You just went through surgery. You're going through treatments, conventional medicine, they're starting to do Reiki. They're starting to do acupuncture. There's other ways. But, even CBD is not something that a lot of people will recommend for you. Like, it's not part of the regimen in which a lot of these institutes have. And so for me, it was one of those things that I'm like, okay, well, my oncotype score is very low. My chance of reoccurrence now is very, very low. But they're like, Lori, we still think that you should just go on this drug, even though it's like I have a 12% chance of, I think it was something like 17% chance of reoccurrence or something, like a really low one. And at the time, I kind of didn't know any better. And I was so overwhelmed with everything else going on that it was like the easy thing to do for me to be like, okay, let me just do this. And at least now I feel like I'm taking care of it, that I'm in control of it at some point, that I'm doing right for myself. And I kind of feel that it's a little bit of a disservice I did to myself, because I was so overwhelmed with everything going on, trying to work, trying to deal with everything else going on in life, and still trying to keep myself healthy, that I feel like I didn't have the opportunity to even research something else, even though I knew there were other options, right? It was kind of like I took the easy route out, and I'm one to admit it. So folks, yep, I'm human. Like, I get it. I'm not, and so now looking back on it, I don't regret the decision. However, the decision has now led me to having multiple symptoms that from the medication that I'm on, right? And they wanted to throw, like I said, other drugs at me for my anxiety. Like, my anxiety went through the roof on this medication. I had brain fog. I am forgetful. Like, you want to talk about loss of libido, like it's things that I need to be very intentional about. And I know I'm not the only one that feels this way, right? So I would love to hear from you. And I know you can't tell me specifically, but for somebody like me who is on tamoxifen, like, I know there are herbal remedies that I can do that could potentially get me off of this medication. Is that a true statement? And it's a potential, right? Like, potentially, after a full-fledged conversation and investigation into who I am, are there certain people that may be a true statement for?
So the answer is no. And I say that for a very specific reason.
Okay.
Because I'm trying to break the idea that herbs are equivalent to pills.
Okay. Explain that.
So there is no there, and this happens all the time. Someone comes in, I have this problem. Let's say it's a hormonal problem. I have a hormonal problem. What herbs can I take? It's like, well, I could give you a bunch of herbs that have effect on your hormonal profile, and they will do this much tiny amount. And it's like, well, see, it doesn't work. It's like, no, we got to stop thinking of a holistic practice like Ayurveda in the same terms we think of allopathy, Western medicine. Herbs were great in the context of all the changes. Herbs support in the entire change of a whole system. So yeah, of course, there are some herbs that are so powerful that they'll just overwhelm whatever's in your body. But that's what's creating the pathology, is the fact that we just try and force something into some position in the body and say, okay, work right now, go, without actually uncovering the layers of the issue. So if someone has a hormonal issue, it would be, okay, yes, you can take herbs, and that's going to start pushing you in the right direction gently, while we also change your diet, while we also change what time you eat, what time you go to sleep, what kind of thoughts you're having, what kind of exercise you're getting, so on and so forth. And what are your deep patterns that you're engaging in on a habitual basis that are generating imbalances within your body. And herbs are really great in the context of that. So I discourage people from thinking that they can go to a pharmacy and pick up turmeric and be healed. That is not how Ayurveda works. But yeah, you're going to get some benefit from it, sure. But if you go take turmeric with black pepper, which, by the way, black pepper is not good for everybody, and neither is turmeric, and say, oh, I'm reducing my inflammation, and then go out and drink a chocolate milkshake, you're not doing it. But that is why, like you said earlier, oh, if this diet doesn't work in 2 weeks, then forget it.
I'm out.
That attitude towards healing is the disease.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah.
Excellent.
So the attitude that I should be able to maintain all my bad habits and have a completely functioning body is an unhealthy attitude towards health. And in and of itself will actually create a problem for us. It allows us to engage in lifestyle behaviors that are completely unnatural, but that are basically being served to us on not a silver platter, a golden platter, in our modern day society saying, feast, like go for it. You can stay up as late as you want. You can do whatever you want. You can work as long as you want. You can do all these things. You can eat whatever you want. And if you take this pill, you'll be fine. That is the biggest health lie ever told. And our society is suffering from it. And it is getting sicker and sicker and sicker by the week. Depression is at an all-time high.
Yeah.
All-time high. Clinical depression, not just I'm sad today. Crippling clinical depression, all-time high. Anxiety, all-time high. Diabetes, all-time high. Cardiovascular disease, all-time high. Those are the number 2 killers in our country. Number 1 and 2, or top 5, whatever. Don't hold me to some statistic. The point is, we're getting sicker, not healthier. And it's largely because of that attitude.
Yeah.
I can take this thing and be fine and continue what I'm doing, as though my lifestyle doesn't have an effect on my health.
And, I love that you're saying that, because the group of people that I think of the most are children, right?
Yeah,
Like we're doing that with children.
absolutely.
And, I see it all the time where parents are feeding their kids like nothing but sugar. And then they have, they're complaining that they're hyperactive. I'm like, well, how are you missing the correlation of, hyperactive behavior and a diet full of sugar? Like it's like giving your kids chocolate milk before they go to bed and expecting them to sleep, right? Like it does not work. So
Well, yeah, well, here's a common pathology I see with young people in the clinic, and let's say ages 12 to 18. I'll just throw that out there. Common pathology. They come in, I can't concentrate. So the parents there with them, right? A lot of the times because they're minors. So yeah, I'm making up a name. Jimmy can't concentrate. And he's had these focus problems since he was 8 years old. It's like, okay, so like, what's Jimmy's lifestyle? Da da da. After a long conversation, kind of probably prying it out of him a little bit, right? He spends about 7 to 8 to 9 hours on a screen every day. Well, use of electronics like in that magnitude is vata aggravating. Vata is a force in Ayurveda that creates an agitation that stops focus from happening. So, okay, and then what's the diet like? Well, the diet's very erratic. Well, that's also caused by vata aggravation. So now you have two things that seem different, but are actually tied. So, okay, so that's 2. So, and then it takes 3 logs to make a fire. So what's next? Well, socially, he's not doing so well because he can't, he's socially disconnected. Now you have isolation, social isolation in there, which drives him even more to the other habits, right? So you've got a trinity of causes there, and there are probably 5 more, but those are major enough to say, okay, so what's Jimmy doing for this lack of focus? Because I won't use the word ADHD. Well, he's been diagnosed with ADHD, and so he's been put on what? What's the drug of choice today? I don't know. Adderall.
Adderall, right? Yeah.
Right? Okay. Well, Adderall is a really powerful substance. It's no joke. And Jimmy's, 14 years old and still developing a lot, but he's been on Adderall since he was 10. That's a really powerful drug. And but nothing has been done about the causative factors. Nothing. And it's just like, well, what can he do? He's been diagnosed with ADHD. That mindset is not helping Jimmy.
Yeah.
And it's happening to youngsters all over the place. It's like, we'll give a kid with diabetes, early onset diabetes, not juvenile diabetes, that's type 1, it's a confusing name. Diabetes type 2, that's happening to a youngster who's overweight and obese at the age of something, right? Give the kid metformin, but you're not addressing
the food,
the
lack of exercise, all of it, right?
all of the emotional issues,
Yeah.
right? The constant threat in the environment, or threat cues, because that's a huge factor in spiking blood sugar levels, is stress levels. When you get stressed, blood sugar increases. So in a diabetic, the blood sugar spikes and they can't bring it back down.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter if they ate a candy bar 10 minutes ago or not. Their blood sugar is going to spike. So exactly like what you're saying, the young people are running up against to this societal attitude, and they're the ones paying the price because they don't know any better.
Yeah. And I love what you're up to. And I think this conversation is so important for people to hear that it's more than just one thing, right? And it's all connected. Every single behavior, every single practice, everything that you do, your environment, it's all connected to your health. So I love the fact that you have this available to people and that, you have dedicated yourself to make this world a better place and make people better. So how can people find you?
Easiest way to find me is go to the website, and it's easy to contact me through the website. So the website is ayurveda.com.
Okay.
And you can also contact me through email, which is victor@ayurveda.com. I'm very available, very accessible. And also on the website, you can check out kind of other talks I've done, things like that, and get more of a feel for how I work. It's not just me; I have a team. There are a lot of Ayurvedic therapies. There are a lot of Ayurvedic hands-on stuff that, of course, have been restricted during these days. But with the vaccine and all things like that, it's starting to lighten up a bit. And I encourage people to connect with me and just talk. And for anyone listening to your show, just mention that you heard of me through the show, and we'll have a nice conversation and see if Ayurveda is a good fit for you.
I love that. Thank you so much. And we truly appreciate you taking the time today to, share your knowledge with us. And it's so needed and so many people. I hope you, those listening, please, contact Victor. And I mean, you are a wealth of knowledge that I really hope people reach out to you and get some support around what they're dealing with. So thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you, Lori. I really appreciate you asking wonderful questions.
Oh, the honor was mine. Trust me. We've all learned so much here today. So thank you.